She thought she was safe in her own home, in the heart of her neighborhood. But the moment they walked through her door, everything she knew about fairness, safety, and justice shattered. Faces turned, whispers started, and suddenly, she wasn't just a resident. She was a target. What happened next would reveal a system stacked against her, a pattern that's more common than anyone wants to admit. This isn't just her story. It's a mirror to a reality many refuse to see. But how did a quiet afternoon turn into a nightmare she couldn't escape? Keep watching. It was a quiet Saturday morning, and Jasmine had finally stolen a few hours to herself. She lived in a tight-knit neighborhood where she knew most faces, waved at familiar passers-by, and felt the comfort of routine. Her life wasn't extravagant, but it was hers, a small apartment filled with books, a kitchen that smelled of fresh coffee, and a balcony overlooking the city streets below. She had planned to meet friends later, but first, she wanted a moment of peace. As she unlocked her door and stepped inside, there was a strange tension in the air she couldn't place. A subtle shift, almost imperceptible, like the calm before a storm. Jasmine didn't know it yet, but that ordinary morning would spiral into something terrifying. A confrontation, one she never expected, was about to shatter her sense of safety and force her to confront a reality she had always tried to ignore. And in that instant, nothing about her neighborhood or the people in it would feel familiar again. But what would happen when the walls she trusted most suddenly turned against her? The nightmare was just beginning. Jasmine thought she knew her neighborhood, but that morning quickly proved her assumptions wrong. The first sign came in the mail, a notice she had never seen before, marked with bold, threatening letters. It claimed she had violated vague community regulations she had never even known existed. Confused, she tried to ask questions, to seek clarification, but the voices on the other end of the phone were cold, dismissive, almost amused at her concern. The rules, it seemed, applied to her in a way they didn't apply to others. By the end of the day, small incidents began piling up, each one gnawing at her sense of security. Neighbors who once smiled now avoided her gaze. Sidewalk conversations would suddenly fall silent when she walked by. Friends whispered cautiously, worried about attracting attention. Every glance, every passing remark felt loaded with meaning, though no one would ever admit it aloud. Jasmine tried to shake it off, telling herself it was paranoia, that she was imagining hostility where none existed. But the paranoia wasn't imagined. It was very real. That afternoon, as she walked to the corner store, a man parked nearby made an unmistakable gesture, one loaded with contempt. Words were thrown, cruel and deliberate, not whispered but shouted, ensuring everyone on the block could hear. People turned and looked, but no one intervened. The message was clear. She didn't belong here. The weight of eyes, the unspoken verdicts, pressed down on her like a physical force, tightening her chest with each step. Things escalated faster than she could process. The next morning, a note appeared taped to her door. Not polite, not bureaucratic, just a single line. This is your last warning. No explanation, no signature, just an implicit threat she couldn't ignore. She tried calling local authorities, explaining that she felt targeted, that these incidents seemed deliberately aimed at her. Some were sympathetic, but most were hesitant, constrained by bureaucratic rules or the invisible currents of bias that no handbook could ever correct. The sense of isolation was suffocating. At work, colleagues noticed a tension etched across her face, but when she tried to explain, it seemed too small for anyone else to understand. When she returned home one evening, she discovered her mailbox had been torn from its post, thrown across the driveway. The jagged edges of the metal gleamed under the porch light. She didn't know who had done it, but the intent was unmistakable. Intimidation, pure and deliberate. Jasmine wasn't just facing random acts of hostility. She was facing a system that seemed designed to ignore her, to dismiss her, to make her feel powerless. When she tried to attend a neighborhood council meeting to voice her concerns, she was met with cold stares, murmurs behind closed doors, and dismissive nods from the very people elected to serve the community. Her questions were deflected, her presence minimized, and her experiences invalidated. Every attempt to assert her rights only seemed to fan the flames of resentment around her. As weeks passed, the incidents intensified. Her car tires were slashed, her apartment was egged, and anonymous calls filled her voicemail, each one more threatening than the last. Local law enforcement began investigating, but every lead turned cold. Evidence disappeared. Surveillance footage conveniently malfunctioned, and witnesses recanted under subtle pressure. It was as if the entire neighborhood had conspired to send a single message: "You are not welcome here." One night, she returned home to find her front door ajar. Nothing was stolen, but the intrusion was deliberate, an unmistakable invasion of privacy meant to terrify her. She stepped inside, heart pounding, and noticed a single envelope lying on the kitchen counter. Inside was a crudely written note: "Leave now or it will get worse." Her hands shook as she crumpled the paper, realizing the stakes were no longer about comfort. They were about survival. Even within her own building, things were deteriorating. Flyers appeared overnight in the lobby, warning residents about the troublemaker on the third floor, complete with exaggerations and outright lies. Rumors spread like wildfire, each iteration more damaging than the last. Friends and acquaintances, uncertain or afraid, began to distance themselves. She was being isolated systematically, psychologically, socially, pushed to the edge by an invisible yet omnipresent force. Despite the growing fear, Jasmine refused to back down. She documented everything: notes, photos, recordings, timestamps. She reached out to local advocacy groups, legal experts, and anyone who would listen. Each attempt to push back revealed the depth of the system's complicity and the cold efficiency with which bias and discrimination were enforced. Every small victory, correcting a falsified claim, exposing a false report, was met with new, more insidious attacks. Why now? The tension had become unbearable. Jasmine could no longer walk down her own street without feeling eyes on her, whispering about her, plotting against her. She realized that this wasn't just about isolated incidents or personal grudges. This was a carefully orchestrated campaign, one designed to exploit fear, enforce submission, and strip her of her rights. And yet, in the midst of fear and isolation, a spark of determination began to grow. She would not be silenced. But just as she prepared to take the next steps, she received a phone call that would change everything. One name she never expected to hear on the other end. A person who could turn her fight into a reckoning. The question now loomed: would she find justice before the system and the people who wanted to see her fail? Crush her completely? The nightmare was far from over, and the next move would determine everything. The night was darker than usual, the kind of darkness that swallows every sense except fear. Jasmine's heart pounded as she approached the lobby, knowing what awaited her. The moment she opened the door, the air hit her, thick with malice, with a heavy, suffocating weight of every look, every whisper, every act of intimidation she had endured. And there they were, faces she once considered neighbors, now twisted with contempt, blocking the hallway like predators circling their prey. "You shouldn't be here," one of them sneered, stepping closer. The voice was calm, measured, but every word dripped with threat. Jasmine's pulse raced. She gripped the envelope of evidence in her hand like a lifeline. Every fiber of her being screamed to turn and run, but she knew running wouldn't solve anything. Not now. Not ever. They laughed as they surrounded her, small gestures of cruelty, pushing, shoving, jabs that stung physically and mentally. One shoved a flyer into her face. "Leave now or suffer the consequences." The paper crumpled in her hands, but her resolve didn't. Fear clawed at her chest, but beneath it, something else rose: rage, determination, the fire of someone who had been pushed to the edge one too many times. "Why?" she demanded, her voice steady despite the tremor she felt. "Why target me like this? I've done nothing to you." Silence. Then a slow, mocking clap from across the hall. "It's nothing personal," one voice said. "It's just how things are." In that instant, Jasmine understood the scope of the fight. This wasn't personal, it was systemic, a network of silence, prejudice, and complicity that had emboldened them for months. Every sneer, every act of sabotage, every whispered warning had been a piece of a larger, terrifying puzzle. Her hands shook as she raised her phone, ready to record, to show the world what was happening. A sudden push sent her stumbling backward, but she caught herself. Every instinct screamed danger, but for the first time, Jasmine realized fear could be a weapon, but so could courage. She held the camera steady, capturing every face, every taunt, every act of hostility. She wasn't just protecting herself anymore. She was creating proof, documenting a truth that no one could deny. And then the moment froze. A neighbor she hadn't expected, someone previously silent, perhaps ashamed, perhaps afraid, stepped forward, standing by her side. The balance shifted. The oppressive energy wavered. Jasmine felt it. The first ripple of hope amid months of terror. She wasn't alone. Not entirely. But even with this glimmer of support, danger was far from over. The crowd around her hissed, the tension crackling like a live wire. Every second felt infinite. Every heartbeat loud in her ears. One wrong move, and the nightmare she had been trapped in could spiral further out of control. Jasmine straightened, lifting her head high, voice firm. This ends the night. The room went silent. The air thickened with anticipation. Something monumental was about to happen, a confrontation that would decide whether months of intimidation would finally break her or finally expose the truth. And in that suspended moment, as every eye turned toward her, Jasmine realized there was no turning back. What happened next would change everything. Jasmine walked out of the building that night, her hands still trembling but her head held high. The intimidation, the threats, the months of being made to feel invisible, they hadn't broken her. Instead, they had sharpened something deeper, courage, the evidence she captured, the witnesses who finally spoke up, and her unwavering refusal to stay silent had exposed cruelty for what it truly was. Justice didn't erase the fear or the pain, but it made the struggle meaningful. It transformed humiliation into accountability. Her story rippled far beyond that one hallway. Social media amplified the truth. News outlets covered the injustice. And the institution that allowed harassment to thrive was forced to confront its complicity. People who had once turned away now saw what silence can enable. Jasmine realized that her fight was never just about herself. It was about the countless others living under the same shadow of racial bias, prejudice, and systemic oppression. Sitting in her living room, replaying the moments on her phone, she felt a complex mix of exhaustion and hope. The trauma wouldn't disappear overnight, but the fear had been met with resilience. She had refused to be a footnote in someone else's story of hate. Instead, she became the catalyst for change. Policies were reviewed, accountability enforced, and communities began to question their own roles in perpetuating discrimination. Her fight wasn't over. Racism doesn't vanish because one person stands up. It persists in the silent corners, in the assumptions we fail to challenge, in the systems that reward indifference. But Jasmine's courage proved one undeniable truth. Speaking up matters. Documentation matters. Standing firm matters. One voice, when heard, can ignite a chorus demanding justice. And as she looked out her window at a world still imperfect, she asked herself, and asks us all, how many more Jasmines will have to face this alone? How long will fear dictate the lives of those who simply want to exist without judgment, suspicion, or harm? Her story was a victory, yes, but it was also a challenge, a mirror reflecting our collective responsibility to act, to listen, and to confront injustice wherever it hides. Because the truth is clear, silence never protects. Silence always enables. And if we don't speak, if we don't act, the cycle continues.